He worked quietly every day without anyone noticing. Every morning he arrived at the large building before the first visitors. He pushed his mop across the shiny floors, emptied overflowing trash cans, and polished surfaces until they gleamed. He never complained, never rushed, and never drew attention to himself. People walked by him as if he were invisible, their faces fixed on phones, papers, or conversations. Among those people was a young girl, full of energy and confidence. She noticed him, but not in a kind way. She noticed him because he seemed different, almost like someone from another world. She watched him push his mop slowly, methodically, and she laughed, not quietly, but loud enough for her friends to hear. She whispered jokes about how he looked so serious while doing something so simple. And her friends giggled along. He heard the laughter, but he didn't react. He didn't turn, didn't frown, and didn't argue. He just kept moving, letting the mop glide over the floor, letting the trash cans stay in his path until he finished his work. To him, the laughter was background noise, something that belonged to the world around him but didn't belong to him. The girl loved to point him out. She would watch him from a distance and make comments about his uniform, his quiet demeanor, even the way he walked. Her friends would nod, laugh, and join in. She thought it was funny to make someone so serious into a joke. She didn't know his story. She didn't know what had brought him there, what he had done in his life, or what he could do inside. The janitor carried a calm that no one could see. He had learned a long time ago that people judge too quickly, that appearances often mislead. He could have been angry at the laughter, embarrassed by the whispers, or hurt by the mocking, but he wasn't. He had learned the value of patience, of waiting for the right moment, and of keeping one's dignity even when no one else noticed. The building was busy that day. Workers came and went, visitors moved through the hallways, and the janitor continued his silent rounds. He cleaned, polished, and made everything shine. Some people thanked him in passing, a polite word here or there, but most didn't even notice. And the girl? She continued to laugh, thinking this man had no depth, no story, no talent. She thought she had him figured out completely. Like a puzzle she had already solved. Little did she know there was more to him than anyone had imagined. Every movement he made, every careful sweep of the mop, was part of a rhythm he carried inside himself. Every quiet moment was a rehearsal for something no one had yet seen. He was not just a janitor. He was someone who had once poured his heart into something extraordinary. Something that would soon leave everyone, including the girl, completely stunned. As the day went on, she continued to watch him, laughing with her friends. She didn't realize she was planting the seeds of a lesson she would never forget. The janitor moved with the same quiet confidence, always calm, always focused. His hands were steady, his steps precise. To anyone who looked closely, there was a sense of discipline in the way he carried himself, but she didn't look closely. She only saw what she wanted, a person to laugh at. The janitor finished cleaning one section of the hall and paused to adjust his uniform. He looked around quietly, surveying the space as if seeing it for the first time. His eyes were calm, almost gentle, but they held a depth that the girl could not begin to understand. She noticed him glancing toward her once briefly, but she didn't think much of it. She thought it was just another glance from someone who couldn't match her energy. Couldn't match her life? She didn't know that the quietness she mocked was part of a life that had been shaped by discipline, by art, and by experiences far beyond her own. She didn't know that behind the janitor's calm exterior was a story of talent, of practice, and of sacrifice. She only knew what she saw in that moment. A man in a uniform pushing a mop, someone she could easily laugh at. The hall remained busy. People moved, spoke, and sometimes stumbled over the small obstacles that had been left behind in the rush of their day. The janitor moved smoothly around them, always aware, always patient. And the girl, laughing as she had been for weeks, never imagined that this ordinary-looking man was about to turn a simple moment into something extraordinary. Because the janitor knew something she didn't. He carried with him a power that no uniform could hide, a skill that no mocking laughter could diminish. And though she didn't know it yet, her perspective, her arrogance, and her laughter were all about to meet an unexpected truth. A truth that would come from his hands, from the instrument waiting quietly in the hall, and from a talent that had been hidden for far too long, and in that calm, ordinary moment, the stage was being set. The janitor continued his work, silent, unnoticed, but always aware. The girl laughed one last time as she walked past him, confident in her assumption. But the seeds of surprise, of awe, and of a lesson she would never forget had already been planted. The hall was bustling that afternoon. People came and went, carrying files, talking on phones, and moving in small groups. The sunlight poured through the tall windows, reflecting off the polished floors that the janitor had spent hours cleaning. His mop glided smoothly across the tiles, moving in a rhythm almost like a dance. He worked quietly, unaware of most of the people around him. The girl, still full of energy, was there with a group of friends. She had a mischievous look in her eyes, and she couldn't resist teasing him again. "Look at him," she whispered, nudging her friend. "He takes cleaning way too seriously. He probably thinks he's some kind of genius at mopping floors." Her friends giggled, looking at him as if he were part of a comedy show. The janitor heard the laughter again, but he didn't react. He had grown used to it. He had learned a long time ago that some people would judge quickly, laugh without understanding, and assume they knew the whole story from a glance. That didn't bother him. What he cared about was his work, his dignity, and deep down, the music that still lived inside him. That day, the building was hosting a small event. A beautiful piano had been set up in the middle of the hall. Its polished black surface reflected the sunlight, and its keys gleamed like pearls. People were gathering around, chatting, and preparing for a brief recital that would begin soon. The janitor paused for a moment, his eyes resting on the instrument. He didn't move toward it, didn't touch it, but there was a quiet recognition in his gaze. The girl noticed the piano and immediately saw an opportunity to make another joke. She turned to her friends with a sly smile. "I dare him to play that?" she whispered, loud enough for the janitor to hear. "I'd bet he doesn't even know a single note." Her friends laughed, expecting him to feel embarrassed or to make a mistake. They were ready to see him humiliated, to confirm their assumption that he was just a janitor, nothing more. For a moment the janitor stopped moving. He looked at the piano, then at the girl and her friends. There was no anger in his eyes, no resentment. Just calm. He walked slowly toward the instrument, each step measured and deliberate. The chatter around him seemed to fade. People were curious now, sensing that something unusual was about to happen. The girl straightened, confident that she had him figured out. He reached the piano and placed his hands gently on the keys. The girl stifled a laugh. "See?" she whispered to her friends. "He's probably never touched one in his life." Her friends snickered, leaning closer to watch. The janitor took a deep breath, and then, with eyes half closed, he pressed a key. A soft, clear note filled the hall. Everyone stopped talking instantly. The sound was so perfect, so controlled, that it drew attention immediately. The janitor's fingers began to move across the keys. At first it was simple, almost casual, but soon it became clear that he was not just playing notes. He was creating music that filled the space, music that seemed to tell a story all on its own. The girl's laughter disappeared. Her mouth opened slightly in surprise. She had not expected this. The piano sang under his hands. The sound was rich and emotional, like someone pouring their soul into each note. People around the hall began to watch in awe. Some had never seen anything like it. The janitor's fingers moved with a speed and precision that seemed impossible for someone who had been quietly cleaning floors just moments before. He played with expression, with passion, and with a depth that made the music feel alive. The girl's friends were stunned. They had thought this would be a joke, a moment of embarrassment. Instead, they were witnessing something extraordinary. The janitor's calm demeanor never faltered. He didn't look up, he didn't seek attention, he didn't smile. He let the music speak for him, and it spoke loudly. A few people in the crowd began whispering. "Who is he?" one woman asked. "He plays like a professional," said a man nearby. The janitor continued, lost in the music. Every key he pressed seemed to tell a story of struggle, patience, and hidden talent. The girl, who had dared him, could not look away. She felt her confidence slipping away, replaced by awe and something she couldn't quite name. As the piece progressed, it became clear that this was not just casual playing. The janitor was performing a complex composition, one that demanded skill, practice, and understanding. Each note was deliberate, each pause meaningful. It was as if he was speaking through the piano, telling a story without words. People around him felt it too. They leaned in, captivated, caught in the spell of the music. The girl's laughter was gone. Her arms hung by her sides, and she felt a strange mixture of embarrassment and admiration. She had judged him too quickly, assumed she knew him, and now she realized she had been completely wrong. The janitor was no ordinary man in a uniform. He was someone who had spent years mastering a craft that most could only dream of. When the last note faded into silence, the hall remained quiet. People blinked, unsure if they should speak. The girl looked at the janitor and saw something she had never noticed before: a quiet dignity, a calm confidence, and eyes that held a lifetime of experience. She wanted to apologize, to explain her behavior, but no words came immediately. She just stared, feeling humbled and small. The janitor finally lifted his hands from the keys. He didn't look at anyone, not even the girl. He simply stood there, letting the moment settle. People began to clap, softly at first, then louder as they realized what they had just witnessed. The girl joined in, reluctantly at first, then with more sincerity. She understood, in that moment, that she had laughed at someone she barely knew. Someone who had hidden a world of talent behind a quiet exterior. Some of the visitors approached him, curious about his story. "Did you study music?" one asked. He nodded slightly, a small, humble gesture. He spoke softly, explaining that he had once trained seriously, that life had taken him in a different direction, and that cleaning had become his way of supporting himself. He had never forgotten his music, and now, for a brief moment, he had shared it with the world. The girl stood a few steps away, her cheeks red. She wanted to speak but wasn't sure what to say. She felt the weight of her mistake, the arrogance she had carried in assuming she knew him, and the lesson she had just received. She realized that people are never just what they seem. That talent can be hidden behind the most ordinary appearances, and that judging someone without knowing their story can be a serious error. The janitor returned to his mop eventually, finishing the rest of his work as the crowd slowly dispersed. People continued talking, shaking their heads in amazement, replaying the performance in their minds. The girl walked away, silent this time, reflecting on what she had witnessed. She knew she would never forget this moment, the way a quiet man in a simple uniform had silenced laughter with music, with skill, and with grace. By the end of the day, the hall had returned to normal. Visitors left, the sunlight shifted, and the janitor continued his work, unnoticed once more. But the energy lingered. The music he had played had left a mark, a memory that would not fade quickly. And the girl, once confident and mocking, had learned a powerful lesson about respect, humility, and the hidden strength of people who seem ordinary at first glance. She would carry that memory with her forever. And though the janitor returned to silence, to his mopping, to his quiet work, he had shown something essential, that true skill, patience, and passion can never be hidden for long. And that sometimes the people we underestimate the most are the ones who can leave the deepest impression. The moment the janitor's fingers touched the piano keys, the hall seemed to change. The soft sound of the first note lingered in the air, delicate yet powerful. People paused, their conversations trailing off, their footsteps halting. It was a sound that demanded attention without shouting, a sound that quietly claimed the space. The girl, who had just been laughing, froze, her eyes wide, her mind racing. She could not believe what she was hearing. The janitor's hands moved gently at first, as if testing the water. Then, with each note, the music began to flow more freely. His fingers danced across the keys, moving with a precision and grace that seemed almost unreal. Every movement had purpose, every sound had meaning. The hall, once filled with chatter and laughter, was now filled with music that seemed to speak directly to the heart. People started leaning closer, drawn by the sound. Some held their breath, afraid to interrupt, afraid to break the spell. The janitor played not just with skill but with feeling. Each note carried emotion, joy, sorrow, hope, and longing. It was as if he was telling a story without words, a story that everyone in the room could feel, even if they could not understand it completely. The girl's laughter had vanished. She stared, mesmerized. She had expected a joke, a moment of embarrassment, and instead she was witnessing something extraordinary. Her cheeks flushed, partly from surprise, partly from shame. She had judged him so quickly, assumed she knew him entirely, and now she realized how wrong she had been. There was a depth to this man she had never considered, a hidden world of talent and experience. The janitor did not look up. He did not seek applause or attention. His eyes were focused on the keys, his body relaxed but purposeful. It was clear that this music was not for anyone else. It was for him, a part of who he was, a voice he had carried quietly for years. But the effect on the audience was undeniable. People felt it in their bones, in the way their hearts seemed to beat in rhythm with the melody. Every note he played seemed deliberate yet effortless. It was a complex composition, something that would have challenged even trained musicians. The hall's acoustics made each sound resonate perfectly, echoing softly against the walls and ceilings. The janitor's hands moved with confidence, never missing a beat, never faltering. It was clear to anyone watching that this was not the act of a beginner. This was the act of someone who had dedicated years of his life to mastering his craft. Some people whispered to each other, "How is he doing this?" One visitor asked quietly. "I've never seen anyone play like that in person," said another. The girl felt a lump in her throat. She could not speak. The words she had rehearsed in her mind, words of teasing, of mockery, were gone. She had no way to explain her behavior, no way to defend herself. The laughter, once so confident and loud, had completely disappeared. The janitor's music began to swell, rising in intensity, yet never becoming chaotic. It was powerful yet controlled. The melody shifted seamlessly, moving from gentle, soft passages to strong, passionate chords that seemed to fill every corner of the hall. Each note seemed to tell a piece of his life, a reflection of struggle, resilience, and quiet determination. People felt themselves drawn into the story he was telling. Even if they did not know the words, the girl could feel the weight of every key he pressed. She noticed the careful movements of his fingers, the slight tilt of his wrists, the subtle expressions on his face. She realized for the first time that his work, his life, his quietness, all of it had not been what it seemed. He had not been ordinary, he had not been simple. He had been remarkable all along, and she had been blind to it. Some of the older visitors in the crowd were nodding, closing their eyes, letting the music carry them. Others looked on in awe, unable to move or speak. The janitor continued, completely absorbed in the performance. Sweat formed slightly on his forehead, but he did not stop. His breathing matched the rhythm of the music, steady and even. There was a harmony between him and the instrument, a connection that went beyond technique and talent. The girl's friends were watching too, their expressions shifting from amusement to shock. They could not believe what they were seeing. They had expected a joke, a funny moment at someone else's expense. Instead, they were witnessing brilliance. The janitor, who had always seemed quiet and unassuming, was commanding the room without saying a single word. As the piece reached its peak, the music became even more emotional. It was a moment of triumph, a moment that seemed to celebrate not just talent, but resilience and the ability to rise above life's challenges. The hall was filled with sound that seemed to wrap around everyone like a warm embrace. Some people felt tears forming, others felt goosebumps, and the girl felt a strange mix of humility, admiration, and regret. She realized she had underestimated him in every way. She had judged him by his uniform, by his quiet demeanor, by the fact that he cleaned floors while others carried on with their busy lives. She had assumed that what she saw was all there was to see, and now she understood how wrong she had been. Talent, patience, and experience could hide in the most unexpected places. She felt ashamed for laughing, ashamed for mocking him, and ashamed for not seeing the person he truly was. The janitor's performance began to slow. the notes softening, the melody fading gently. It was as if he had taken the audience on a journey, beginning with curiosity, rising to excitement, and then bringing them home with a sense of peace. The last note lingered in the air, long after his fingers had lifted from the keys. The hall was silent, filled only with the echo of the sound and the emotions it had stirred. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The girl's heart pounded in her chest. She felt the weight of what she had witnessed, the impact of the music, and the realization of her own mistake. She wanted to speak, to apologize, to say something meaningful, but the words seemed too small for the moment. She just stood there, staring at him, taking in every detail of the man she had laughed at only moments before. Then, slowly, the crowd began to clap. Softly at first, then louder, until the hall was filled with applause. People cheered, some whistled, some clapped again and again. The janitor, still calm and humble, nodded slightly, acknowledging the audience but not making a spectacle of himself. His hands rested gently on the piano, as if saying goodbye to the music he had just shared. The girl joined in the applause, hesitantly at first, then with more sincerity. She could feel the truth of the lesson in her chest. Never judge someone without knowing their story. Never underestimate quiet people, and never assume that talent is obvious on the surface. She had learned in one powerful moment that greatness often hides where no one thinks to look. People began to ask questions, approaching him carefully. "Where did you learn to play like that? Have you performed professionally before?" The janitor answered softly, explaining that he had studied music seriously when he was younger, that life had taken him in another direction, and that he had continued to practice in silence for his own satisfaction. He never bragged, never sought attention, and never let anyone see the depth of his skill until now. The girl listened, fascinated. She wanted to apologize, not just for the laughter, but for underestimating him for so long. She realized that respect was earned not by appearances, not by uniforms or roles, but by the person themselves, their actions, their character, and the skills they carry inside. By the time the performance ended completely, the hall had returned to its ordinary rhythm. People were leaving, conversations resuming, footsteps echoing, but the memory of the music, of the janitor's brilliance, lingered. The girl walked away quietly, her mind replaying every note, every movement, every moment of the performance. She knew she would never forget this day, never forget the lesson she had learned, and never again underestimate someone based on appearances. The janitor returned to his routine, quietly finishing his cleaning. He moved with the same calm, measured rhythm, his dignity intact, his talent revealed but not flaunted. For him, the performance had been a quiet act, a sharing of something he loved. For the girl, for the audience, it had been a revelation, a reminder that true greatness can be found in the most unexpected places, and that every person carries a story worth discovering. And as the hall emptied, and the sunlight shifted across the polished floors, the janitor's music echoed silently in the hearts of those who had witnessed it. The girl, now thoughtful and humbled, walked slowly, carrying with her a lesson she would remember for the rest of her life. The quiet janitor, once laughed at, had shown the world, and especially her, that talent. Passion and dignity cannot be hidden forever, and that respect is something every person deserves, no matter how ordinary they may appear at first glance. The music had ended, but its echo lingered in the hall like a soft whisper that refused to fade. People slowly began to move, talking in hushed tones, shaking their heads in disbelief. Some were still staring at the janitor, as if trying to comprehend what they had just witnessed. The girl stood frozen in place, unable to move, unable to speak. Her laughter, which had once been so loud and confident, was gone. She felt a mixture of awe, guilt, and curiosity swirling inside her. The janitor gently lifted his hands from the piano keys, placing them carefully on the instrument as if sealing a secret. He looked around the hall, not with pride, not with arrogance, but with calm acceptance. He had shared something deeply personal, yet he did not seek recognition. The applause around him was soft at first, growing steadily as people realized the depth of his talent. Yet he did not smile broadly or take a bow. His presence was quiet, humble, and dignified. A few people stepped closer, clearly curious about his story. "Where did you learn to play like that?" one visitor asked softly. "Have you performed in concerts before?" The janitor paused for a moment, as if considering how much to reveal. Then he spoke in a low, calm voice, explaining pieces of his past. He had trained seriously in music when he was younger, dedicating hours every day to mastering the piano. Life, however, had taken him in another direction. Responsibilities, financial struggles, and unexpected circumstances had led him to this job. Cleaning floors and caring for the building, he admitted that he had almost given up on music entirely. Yet, even in the quiet of his life, he had continued to practice. He had found small moments when no one was watching to sit at a piano, to touch the keys, to feel the music flow through him. For years, it had been his solace, his private joy, something that no one could take away. Now, for the first time in a long while, he had shared it with others, and the reaction had been beyond anything he had imagined. The girl listened carefully, taking in every word. She felt a deep sense of remorse for the way she had treated him. She had laughed at him, mocked him, assumed she knew everything about him just by looking at his uniform and his quiet nature. She realized now how wrong she had been. There was a richness, a depth, and a resilience to him that she had completely overlooked. She had judged him by appearances and had almost missed seeing the real person. Other visitors asked more questions. "Did you study with a teacher? Did you ever consider becoming a professional musician?" He nodded, explaining that he had been talented, yes, but life had not allowed him the chance to pursue music professionally. Family responsibilities, financial needs, and the need to survive had all led him to his current work. Yet despite all of that, he had never forgotten the piano, never forgotten the music, never forgotten the discipline and passion that had once defined him. The girl felt herself growing quieter, more introspective. She had always thought that life was simple, that people could be understood quickly, and that appearances told the full story. But here was someone who had lived a lifetime of experience, who had trained and struggled and persevered, and who had carried a secret talent that none of them could have guessed. She realized how small her judgments had been, how unfair her laughter had been, and how much she had underestimated the man standing before her. He spoke modestly about his life, never boasting, never seeking sympathy, never asking for recognition. He spoke about the discipline it had taken to learn music, the frustration of not being able to pursue his passion fully, and the quiet satisfaction of practicing when no one was watching. His story was simple yet profound. It was a story of patience, perseverance, and quiet strength, a story that resonated deeply with everyone listening. The girl took a step closer, her eyes fixed on him. She wanted to apologize, to say something meaningful, but she struggled to find the right words. Finally, she spoke softly. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have laughed at you. I judged you, and I was wrong." Her voice trembled slightly, not with fear, but with the weight of realization. She understood that her actions had been careless, that she had dismissed someone truly remarkable without even knowing him. The janitor looked at her, his calm expression unchanged, but there was a small, gentle acknowledgement in his eyes. He nodded slightly, accepting her apology without a word. It was not about punishment or revenge. It was about understanding, about teaching a lesson through action rather than confrontation. His quiet dignity spoke louder than any words ever could. Other people in the hall began to look at the girl as well. Some smiled knowingly, recognizing that she had just learned something important. Others were still caught up in their own awe of the music, still trying to grasp the beauty and skill they had witnessed. But for the girl, this moment was personal. She had learned a lesson that could not be undone, a lesson about humility, respect, and the hidden strength that people carry within them. The janitor returned to his routine after a few moments. He picked up his mop, continued cleaning, and moved quietly around the hall. Yet the energy in the room had changed. People no longer saw him as just a janitor. They saw him as a person with a story, with talent, with depth. And the girl walked a little slower, her mind replaying the performance and the words he had shared. She knew she would never again judge someone solely by how they appeared. As the day continued, the hall gradually emptied. Visitors left with murmurs of admiration and disbelief. Some paused to thank the janitor, offering compliments and genuine curiosity. Others simply walked away, carrying the memory of the music and the story with them. The girl stayed for a moment longer, watching him work. Noticing the care with which he polished every surface, the calm patience in his movements, and the quiet pride in his posture, she realized that talent, character, and strength are not always obvious. They can be hidden behind uniforms, routines, and silent work. She had laughed at him because she had not looked closely enough, because she had assumed she knew his story. Now she understood the importance of humility, the value of observation, and the power of respecting everyone, no matter who they seemed to be. The janitor, for his part, continued his work without fanfare. He did not seek attention for what he had done. His goal had never been to impress, to win admiration, or to teach a lesson. He simply shared a part of himself when the opportunity arose. And in doing so, he had touched the lives of everyone in that hall, teaching them a lesson that words alone could never convey. The girl finally approached him one last time before leaving. She bowed her head slightly, her voice soft but sincere. "Thank you," she said, "for the music, for showing me, for everything." He nodded once, acknowledging her words. There was no need for a long conversation. The message had been received. She would carry it with her, always dotted as she left the building. She felt a shift within herself. She understood now that people are more than what we see on the surface. She understood that everyone has a story, a talent, or a struggle that may not be immediately visible. And she understood that respect and kindness are essential. No matter who someone appears to be, the janitor finished his work quietly. He moved through the hall with the same calm, steady rhythm, untouched by pride or attention. But the impact of his actions remained, invisible yet undeniable. The girl and the others had witnessed something rare, a demonstration of skill, humility, and dignity all at once. And that lesson, quiet but powerful, would linger long after the piano had fallen silent by the time the sun began to set. The hall was empty, the echo of the day's events still hanging in the air. The janitor, once laughed at and underestimated, had revealed a hidden brilliance. He had shown the world, and especially the girl, that talent and character cannot be judged by appearances, and that everyone deserves respect, regardless of the role they play or the uniform they wear. The girl walked home slowly, replaying every moment, every note, every word. She knew she had been given a rare opportunity to witness greatness where she had least expected it, to learn humility in a single afternoon, and to understand that people are more than what they seem. It was a lesson she would carry forever, a story she would never forget. As the janitor quietly closed the hall for the day, he carried with him a quiet satisfaction. He had shared his music, he had been true to himself, and he had reminded the world that dignity, talent, and passion are not always obvious, but they are always real. He had touched hearts without needing to speak, had taught a lesson without needing to shout, and had shown that respect is something every person deserves, no matter how ordinary they may seem. The day had moved on, but the memory of the music and the lesson it carried lingered in the air. The girl walked slowly through the hall, each step heavy with reflection. She thought about the way she had laughed, about the jokes she had made, and about the arrogance she had carried without even realizing it. She had judged the janitor without knowing him, and now she felt the weight of that mistake. But she also felt a new understanding, a sense of humility that she had never experienced before. She had witnessed something extraordinary, a man who had been quietly living his life, who had hidden a world of talent behind a simple uniform, who had turned mockery into admiration without a single word. She realized that true greatness often goes unnoticed, that people carry hidden stories, hidden struggles, and hidden gifts that the world may never see unless we take the time to look. The janitor had returned to his work after the performance, moving quietly through the hall, finishing his cleaning with the same calm, steady rhythm he had always maintained. But now the hall felt different. People no longer saw him as just a janitor. They saw a man of skill, patience, and depth. They saw someone who had endured life's challenges without complaint, someone who had cultivated his talent even when circumstances had forced him to live quietly, someone who had reminded them that respect and dignity are earned not by appearances, but by character. The girl finally gathered the courage to approach him. She stopped a few steps away, her eyes lowered, unsure of how to begin. The crowd had mostly dispersed, leaving just a few curious onlookers. She cleared her throat softly, feeling the words weigh heavily in her mind. I want to say I'm sorry," she whispered. "I shouldn't have laughed at you. I judged you without knowing anything about you. I was wrong." The janitor looked at her, calm and steady, and gave a small, gentle nod. There was no anger, no harsh words, no reproach. His silence spoke volumes. It was a silence that held understanding, forgiveness, and quiet strength. He had already made his point through his music, through his talent, and through the grace with which he carried himself. The girl felt the sincerity of his acceptance, and a wave of relief mixed with respect washed over her. She wanted to say more, to explain herself, but no words seemed enough. She realized that her laughter had not just been careless, but also short-sighted. She had assumed she understood someone's life, someone's talent, someone's worth, based solely on what she could see on the surface. And now she understood the danger of such assumptions. People are more than what we see. Everyone has a story, a skill, a depth that may not be obvious. Other people who remained in the hall were also watching. Some whispered quietly to one another, commenting on the extraordinary performance they had witnessed. Some smiled knowingly at the girl, understanding that she had just experienced a lesson in humility and respect. The janitor continued his work, unaffected by the attention. Yet everyone around him felt the impact of his presence, of his story, and of the music he had shared. The girl looked around and saw the hall with new eyes. She noticed the way he moved, the care he took in every action, the quiet discipline he displayed in his work. She saw the dignity in his every movement, the patience that had been cultivated over years of practice and perseverance. She realized that he had lived a life rich with experience and dedication, and that her laughter had been both unfair and thoughtless. She finally spoke again, softly but with determination. "Thank you," she said, "for the music, for showing me, for everything. I didn't understand before, but I do now. You've taught me something I will never forget." The janitor nodded once more, his expression unchanged but full of quiet acknowledgement. It was enough. The message had been received, the lesson understood. As the day came to a close, people began to leave the building. The janitor finished his tasks, moving from one corner to another, ensuring everything was neat and clean. The girl lingered for a moment longer, not wanting to leave just yet. She felt the weight of the experience, the depth of the lesson, and the memory of the music still resonating in her mind. She knew she would carry it with her forever. Walking home, she reflected on what had happened. She thought about her own assumptions, her own judgments, and her own tendency to see only what she wanted to see. She realized that respect should never be based on appearances, on uniforms, on quietness, or on any surface-level observation. Respect is earned through understanding, empathy, and recognition of the depth that exists within every person. The janitor, meanwhile, had returned to his modest home after a long day. He did not dwell on the attention he had received or the applause he had earned. For him, the music was a gift he carried within himself, a private joy he shared when the moment called for it. But he knew the impact of that moment. He had shown that patience, humility, and skill are more powerful than mockery, more powerful than assumptions, and more powerful than laughter meant to demean. Days passed, but the lesson remained with the girl. She thought about the janitor whenever she saw someone quietly going about their work, whenever she heard music, or whenever she felt the urge to judge someone too quickly. She had learned to look deeper, to seek understanding, and to value the quiet strength that people carry within them. She realized that true greatness is often hidden, and that it is revealed only when we take the time to notice. She also understood the importance of humility. She had entered that hall with confidence, laughter, and a sense of superiority, but she had left with respect, admiration, and a profound understanding of human potential. She knew she had been given a rare opportunity to witness greatness where she least expected it, to learn a life-changing lesson without words, and to recognize the extraordinary in someone she had almost dismissed entirely. Back in the building, the janitor continued his routine quietly each day. But now, the people around him had seen him differently. They treated him with more respect, with gentleness, and with acknowledgement of the person he truly was. The girl, in particular, approached her interactions with him differently. She spoke politely, listened attentively, and observed carefully. She carried the memory of the music and the lesson in her heart, allowing it to shape how she treated everyone around her. Time passed, but the story of that afternoon remained vivid. The janitor had shown that dignity, skill, and humility are powerful tools. He had demonstrated that true talent cannot be hidden forever, and that respect should never be given lightly or withheld unfairly. The girl had learned, through her own mistake and through his generosity, that every person has value, depth, and a story worth discovering. She often thought about the sound of the piano, the way it filled the hall, and the emotions it stirred. She remembered the expression on his face, calm yet focused, and the way his hands moved with precision and grace. She realized that the lesson was not just about music or talent, it was about life, about how we perceive others, and about the importance of seeing people for who they truly are. The janitor's story had changed her, shaped her perspective, and left an imprint on her heart. She no longer laughed at others carelessly, no longer assumed she knew their worth, and no longer measured people by appearances alone. She had learned to value patience, humility, and the hidden talents that exist in everyone. She knew that the world is full of quiet heroes, people who may seem ordinary but who carry extraordinary gifts, and that she had been lucky to witness one firsthand. In the end, the janitor remained as quiet and humble as ever. He continued his work, polishing floors, cleaning corners, and moving through life with dignity. But the impact of his actions and his music lingered in the hearts of those who had witnessed it. The girl, once confident and mocking, had learned a lesson she would carry forever, that respect, understanding, and empathy are far more valuable than laughter at someone else's expense, and that the most ordinary people can sometimes leave the most extraordinary marks on our lives. And so, life continued, but it was forever changed by that single afternoon. The janitor returned to his work quietly, the girl walked away wiser, and the memory of the music and the lesson it carried became something they would both carry forever. It was a story of patience, humility, and hidden greatness, a story that reminded everyone who witnessed it that the world is full of surprises, that talent can hide in the most unexpected places, and that respect and understanding are gifts we should offer to everyone we meet.